I remember the silence of that room more than the pain. Machines hummed softly, voices outside were hushed, and every breath felt like it might be my last. The doctors had done what they could. The medicines had been tried, and the faces around me carried a heaviness they were trying to hide. When a person reaches that point, all the noise of the world fades away, and only the truth remains. I was on my deathbed, and I knew it. At that moment, I realized something very important. When everything else is stripped away, all that truly remains is your relationship with Allah. Titles, wealth, plans, and worries suddenly lose their power. I lay there thinking about my life, my prayers, my mistakes, my gratitude, and the many times I had delayed turning back sincerely to my Creator. I could not move much, but my heart was racing with thoughts and emotions I had never felt so intensely before. I began to speak to Allah in a way I never had before. There were no long, eloquent words, no rehearsed phrases. It was raw, honest, and desperate. I admitted my weakness, my sins, and my complete inability to save myself. I acknowledged that if healing were to come, it could only come by His permission. And if death were written for me, then I begged Him to forgive me and grant me mercy. Something powerful happens when a servant turns to Allah with absolute sincerity, not bargaining, not making promises out of fear alone, but truly surrendering. I stopped asking why me and started saying, Ya Allah, you know best. That shift in the heart changed everything. I felt a strange calm settle over me even though my body was still weak. The fear of death softened, replaced by trust in the one who gives life and takes it away. I reflected on the stories we often hear, but rarely internalize. How many people were healed when hope seemed lost? How many times did Allah change a situation in a single moment? We say we believe He is Al-Qadir, the All-Powerful, but do we truly live with that belief? On that bed, I had no choice but to believe fully, because nothing else remained. I asked those around me to make dua, not just for my recovery, but for Allah's will to be done. I asked them to forgive me if I had wronged them, because when you stand at the door of the hereafter, you want to carry as little burden as possible. Those moments of reconciliation brought a lightness to my heart that no medicine could provide. Then something unexpected happened. Slowly, very slowly, my condition began to change. The same doctors who had spoken gently about preparing now spoke with surprise. Numbers improved, symptoms eased, and strength began to return. What they could not explain medically, I recognized spiritually. This was not my strength, not my effort, not the treatment alone. This was mercy. But the real healing did not start in my body. It started in my heart. Before any physical improvement, Allah healed my understanding, my priorities, and my connection to Him. I realize that sometimes Allah brings us to our weakest point, not to destroy us, but to rebuild us correctly. When we are broken, we are more open to guidance. When we are helpless, we finally acknowledge who truly has power. As the days passed, I moved from being completely bedridden to sitting up, then standing, then walking. Each step felt like a gift. I thanked Allah for every breath, because I had once thought I would not have many left. I promised myself that if I were given another chance, I would not live the same careless life I had lived before. Healing does not always mean a dramatic miracle that happens instantly. Sometimes it is gradual, sometimes it is quiet, and sometimes it is a change in perspective before a change in condition. But make no mistake, when Allah decides to heal, nothing can stop it. And when He decides to test, even the strongest will struggle without His help. I stand before you today not as someone who is special, but as someone who was shown mercy. My story is not meant to glorify me, but to remind you of the power of turning back to Allah sincerely. Never think your situation is too far gone. Never believe that your sins disqualify you from mercy. And never underestimate the power of dua, made from a heart that has truly surrendered. If you are listening to this while sick, While broken or while feeling hopeless, know this: Allah is closer to you than you realize. Call upon Him, trust Him, and leave the outcome to Him. Whether healing comes in this world or peace comes through acceptance, the true success is returning to Allah with a heart that knows Him, trusts Him, and relies only on Him. I remember lying there, weak and unable to move, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of my own mortality pressing down on me. At that moment, every worldly distraction, every worry, every concern that had once seemed so significant vanished into nothingness. I could hear the soft hum of the machines around me, the quiet footsteps of nurses, the gentle murmur of voices outside my room. All of it seemed distant, almost unreal. What remained was the undeniable reality of life and death, and the realization that nothing in this world could protect me or save me except the mercy of Allah. It was in that quiet, in that moment of absolute vulnerability, that I understood what it truly meant to surrender to Allah. To surrender is not merely to say the words or to nod in agreement during prayers. It is to feel deep within the heart that you are powerless, and that the only one who can bring relief, peace, or healing is Allah Himself. I realized that all my past reliance on my own strength, my knowledge, my resources, and even the people around me had limits. The doctors, the medicines, the treatments, they were all important, but none of them could ultimately change the reality of what Allah had written. And so, the first step in my journey of healing on that deathbed was understanding this absolute truth. Surrender is not a weakness. It is recognition of reality. It is a conscious decision to place trust in the Creator, who is most merciful and most powerful. As I lay there, I began to reflect on how little I had truly surrendered in my life. I had prayed countless prayers, performed countless acts of worship, and yet in my heart I often clung to control, to worry, to fear, and to my own plans. I realized that surrender is not about stopping action or giving up on life. It is about aligning your heart with the will of Allah, knowing that He sees what you cannot see, and trusting that His wisdom is far greater than your understanding. I remembered the words that I had often heard, that Allah loves those who rely upon Him, that He responds to the call of the sincere, and that no matter how desperate a situation may seem, He has the power to change it. I began to speak to Allah quietly from my heart, not with grand words, but with raw honesty. I admitted my fear of death, my anxiety, my regrets, and my mistakes. I admitted that I had taken His blessings for granted, that I had delayed returning to Him sincerely, that I had been distracted by the fleeting pleasures of this world. I asked for forgiveness, for mercy, for healing if it was His will, and for the strength to accept His decree. If death was nearer than I had imagined, as I surrendered, I noticed something remarkable. A calmness began to seep into my heart, a sense of peace that I had never experienced before. My fear, though still present, became manageable. It was as if surrender had opened a door to divine tranquility. I realized then that surrender is not a passive state. It is an active engagement with faith. It requires humility, courage, and complete trust. It requires letting go of the illusion that you can control everything and accepting that true control belongs only to Allah. In that state, I understood why the prophets and righteous servants throughout history emphasized reliance on Allah above all else. They knew that the heart that surrenders fully is the heart that finds peace even in the face of death. I reflected on the Quranic verses and the prophetic traditions that speak about reliance, trust, and surrender. How many times do we hear that if we place our trust in Allah, He is sufficient for us. How often do we underestimate the power of surrender, thinking that we must solve everything ourselves, that we must fight alone, that we must plan every detail of our lives? On my deathbed, I realized how wrong this thinking is. Surrender is not resignation. It is the ultimate form of strength, for it is the acknowledgement of our limitations and the acknowledgement of Allah's infinite power. I also realized that surrender requires complete honesty with oneself and with Allah. You cannot really surrender while hiding feelings of doubt, fear, resentment, or pride. You must lay everything bare, knowing that Allah already knows, and trust that He will respond in the best way. So I poured out my heart, acknowledging every weakness, every fault, every moment of neglect, and I asked Allah to guide me, to heal me, to strengthen me, and to grant me mercy. I reflected on the fact that surrender transforms the heart. It shifts focus from fear to hope, from despair to trust, from doubt to certainty. When the heart surrenders, it finds solace in knowing that no matter how dark the night, Allah is the light that never fades. It is this surrender that prepares a person for healing, for recovery, and even for the acceptance of death with dignity. I remembered that surrender is not a one-time act. It is a continuous state. It is the repeated turning back to Allah, the constant recognition of our dependence on Him, and the persistent choice to place our trust entirely in His wisdom. On that bed, each breath I took reminded me of the fragility of life and the importance of surrender. I thought of all the times I had struggled unnecessarily, all the sleepless nights spent worrying about outcomes that were never truly in my hands, all the moments of anxiety over situations that Allah alone could control. And I realized that the true relief, the true comfort comes not from removing the difficulty immediately, but from surrendering in the midst of it, trusting that Allah knows what is best. I also noticed that surrender brings clarity. When you surrender, you see life through the lens of faith rather than fear. You begin to prioritize what matters: your relationship with Allah, the rights of others, the sincerity of your intentions, and the purity of your heart. It is in surrender that you find perspective, even when facing what seems like the end. As I surrendered, I became aware of the mercy surrounding me, not just from Allah, but from those around me. Their prayers, their concern, their support became more meaningful because my heart was open to receiving Allah's mercy through all possible means. I understood that surrender allows divine help to manifest in ways we cannot predict. What seemed like a hopeless situation began to change subtly. My heart felt lighter, my mind felt calmer, and even my body, though weak, began to respond to treatment in ways that were unexpected. This experience taught me that surrender to Allah is the foundation for all forms of healing: physical, emotional, spiritual. True surrender aligns the heart with the source of all strength and allows His mercy to flow freely. When I was on my deathbed, surrounded by the quiet hum of machines and the soft footsteps of nurses, I felt a sense of helplessness I had never experienced before. My body was weak, my energy drained, and the doctors had done all they could. In those moments, I realized that no human effort, no medicine, and no treatment could bring me the relief or healing I so desperately needed. I was completely dependent on Allah, and this dependence opened my eyes to the immense power of sincere dua. Dua, I realize, is not merely words uttered from the lips. It is the language of the heart, a conversation with the Creator from a place of humility, trust, and complete surrender. When I began to pray sincerely, I felt something shift within me. It was as though my heart, which had carried fear, anxiety, and regret, began to lighten. The words I spoke were simple, unembellished, and deeply honest. I did not ask for healing with arrogance or expectation, but with the awareness that whatever Allah wills is best. I asked for relief, for strength, for mercy, and for forgiveness, and I placed the outcome entirely in His hands. I remembered that Allah listens to the call of every sincere heart, that He is closer to us than our jugular vein, and that no plea, no matter how small, escapes His attention. The power of dua, I discovered, lies in sincerity. It is not about the number of words, the eloquence of speech, or the recitation of formulas. It is about a heart that is open, humble, and vulnerable before Allah, recognizing its complete dependence on Him. I reflected on the countless stories in the Quran and Hadith where dua brought relief and healing when all hope seemed lost. Prophet Ayub, peace be upon him, called out to Allah in his suffering, and his patience and sincere plea brought complete restoration. Similarly, the companions of the Prophet, peace be upon him, relied on dua in moments of extreme need, and their trust in Allah never wavered. As I lay there, I understood that dua is both a means of seeking help and an act of worship that strengthens faith. When you call upon Allah sincerely, you acknowledge that He alone has control over every matter and that His wisdom surpasses human understanding. I began to feel the transformative effect of this realization. The fear that had gripped my heart began to ease, replaced by a sense of hope and trust. I realized that dua has the power to change not only our circumstances, but also our hearts. It brings patience, acceptance, and clarity, and it reconnects us to the one who knows what is best. In that vulnerable state, I poured out my heart without holding back. I admitted my mistakes, my sins, my fears, and my regrets. I asked Allah to forgive me, to heal me if it was His will, and to grant me strength to endure whatever outcome He had destined. Speaking directly from the heart, I felt an indescribable sense of peace. This peace was not a result of certainty about my physical recovery, but a result of connecting deeply with Allah. It made me realize that the purpose of dua is not only to request something, but also to establish a profound bond with the Creator, to seek His pleasure, and to place one's reliance fully on Him. As I continued to make dua, I reflected on the importance of intention. Sincere dua is not motivated by selfish desire or pride. It is motivated by the recognition that Allah is the ultimate source of all good. It is an acknowledgement that our needs, no matter how urgent or severe, are known to Him, and that He is able to respond in ways far beyond our comprehension. I felt a sense of humility that I had never experienced before. In that humility, I realized that human effort has limits, but dua has the power to transcend those limits. It bridges the gap between weakness and divine mercy. I also noticed that sincere dua changes the way we perceive our struggles. When I prayed, I felt more patient, more accepting, and more aware of the lessons embedded within my situation. Dua teaches us to recognize our dependence on Allah and to let go of the illusion that we control our fate. As I continued to call upon Allah, I noticed subtle changes in my condition. My body, which had been failing, began to show signs of improvement. The doctors, who had once been cautious in their words, began to express surprise at the progress. I knew that the healing I experienced was not simply a result of medicine or treatment, but of divine intervention catalyzed by the heartfelt dua that I had made. This realization deepened my faith and strengthened my commitment to maintain a sincere connection with Allah. I also reflected on the importance of consistency in dua. Sincere dua is not a one-time act. It is a continuous turning back to Allah, a repeated acknowledgement of our need for Him, and a persistent effort to seek His me. Even when it seems that answers are delayed, the act of calling upon Allah itself brings spiritual comfort and strengthens the heart. In those moments, I understood that dua is both a shield and a source of strength. It shields us from despair and hopelessness, and it empowers us to endure hardships with patience and trust. I felt the truth of the prophetic saying that nothing is more powerful in changing circumstances than a sincere dua. It is a means through which Allah manifests His mercy, alters the course of events, and provides relief in ways that often exceed our expectations. On my deathbed, I experienced firsthand how the combination of surrender and sincere dua can create a profound transformation. My heart, once overwhelmed with fear and doubt, became calm. My mind, once clouded with worry, became focused on the mercy and power of Allah. My body, though weak, began to respond to treatment, and my overall state improved. It was a testament to the power of heartfelt communication with Allah, a reminder that dua is not merely a ritual, but a lifeline that connects us to the most merciful, the most powerful, the all-knowing. I realize that dua works in ways we may not immediately perceive. It changes our perspective. It strengthens our resilience. It deepens our trust. And it opens doors for divine intervention. The act of calling upon Allah, especially in moments of extreme need, is itself a form of healing, for it aligns the heart with the source of all me, RCI and power. I felt a deep gratitude for having the opportunity to experience the power of sincere dua firsthand. I understood that no matter how dire the situation, no matter how close one may be to the end of life, Allah's mercy is always within reach for the one who calls upon Him with sincerity, humility, and trust. Lying on that bed with my strength fading, I found my mind drifting back through the years of my life in a way I had never experienced before. Moments I had forgotten resurfaced with clarity. Words I had spoken carelessly echoed in my ears, and choices I had made without much thought suddenly carried weight. When the body becomes weak, the soul becomes alert. I began to reflect deeply on how I had lived, what I had prioritized, and how often I had delayed what truly mattered. I realized that much of my life had been spent chasing things that promised satisfaction but delivered emptiness. Success, comfort, recognition, and worldly stability had occupied my thoughts far more than my connection with Allah. On that bed, none of those things could help me. They could not ease my fear. They could not bring peace to my heart, and they could not extend my life by even a single breath. This realization was painful, but it was also enlightening. I began to understand that reflection is a mercy from Allah, a chance to see the truth before it is too late. I thought about my prayers, not just whether I prayed, but how I prayed. How often had I rushed through them, CT'd, treating them as an obligation to complete rather than a meeting with my Lord. I reflected on the times I had spoken harshly, held grudges, or delayed forgiveness, assuming there would always be time to fix things later. On my deathbed, the illusion of later disappeared completely. Every regret felt heavier, but instead of pushing me into despair, it pushed me toward humility. I realized that Allah, in His wisdom, sometimes brings a person close to death so they can finally wake up to life. Reflection stripped away my excuses. I could no longer blame circumstances, people, or pressure. I had to face myself honestly. I saw clearly how often I relied on my own plans rather than placing my trust fully in Allah. I remembered moments when things went well, and I attributed success to my effort alone, forgetting to thank the one who made it possible. That realization humbled me deeply. It reminded me that faith is not just for times of hardship, but especially for times of ease. On that bed, I understood that hardship exposes the truth of our faith, while ease often hides our weaknesses. As I reflected, I began to reassess my priorities. I realized that the things I once stressed over were insignificant compared to the state of my heart. Arguments, grudges, competition, and endless worry over worldly matters suddenly felt meaningless. What mattered was whether Allah was pleased with me, whether I had fulfilled my responsibilities, whether I had treated others with kindness, and whether I had lived with sincerity. This reflection brought clarity. It helped me see what deserved my energy and what did not. I began to think about how little time we actually have and how easily it slips away. Life does not announce when it is nearing its end. One day you are busy planning, and the next day you are lying helpless, dependent on others for even the smallest needs. That realization shook me. It made me understand the importance of using time wisely, of not delaying repentance, of not postponing goodness. Reflection also softened my heart. I found myself thinking about the people in my life, my family, my friends, those I had wronged and those who had wronged me. I realized how fragile relationships are and how unnecessary many conflicts truly are. Pride suddenly seemed foolish. Holding on to anger seemed pointless. I made a conscious effort in my heart to forgive, to let go, and to ask Allah to forgive me as well. This emotional release brought a sense of lightness I had not felt in years. It reminded me that faith is not only about rituals, but also about the state of the heart. Through reflection, my trust in Allah grew stronger. I realized that everything I was going through was not random or cruel, but purposeful. Allah was teaching me, correcting me, and drawing me closer to Him in a way comfort never could. I began to see my illness not just as a test, but as a lesson and a gift. It forced me to slow down, to think, to reevaluate, and to return to Allah with sincerity. Reflection allowed me to see that Allah had always been kind to me, even when I failed to recognize it. Every blessing I had enjoyed, every difficulty I had survived, every door that had opened or closed was part of a divine plan far greater than my understanding. This realization strengthened my faith. It reminded me that Allah does not abandon His servants even when they stray. He gently and sometimes firmly brings them back. As I continued to reflect, I felt my heart becoming more focused, more aware, more connected. Fear of death began to transform into acceptance and trust, not because I felt ready, but because I knew that Allah's decree is always just and wise. Reflection taught me that faith is not about controlling outcomes, but about trusting the one who controls them. It taught me that priorities must be aligned with the hereafter, not just the temporary pleasures of this world. It taught me that self-awareness is essential for spiritual growth. On that bed, reflection became a form of worship. It allowed me to recognize my shortcomings without losing hope. It reminded me that Allah's mercy is greater than my mistakes. It strengthened my resolve to change, to live differently if given another chance. Even as my body remained weak, my faith felt stronger than ever. My heart felt more alive than it had in years. Reflection opened my eyes to the reality of life and death, to the importance of sincerity, and to the beauty of returning to Allah. Humility and trust. On that bed, surrounded by the quiet sounds of the hospital, I began to understand a truth that many of us know intellectually but rarely feel deeply. Healing often begins in the heart long before it manifests in the body. My body was weak, my energy nearly gone, and the prognosis uncertain. But I noticed that as I shifted my focus inward, something remarkable began to happen. My heart, once restless with fear and regret, started to feel lighter, calmer, and more receptive to the mercy of Allah. I realized that the physical body, though important, is only one part of the human experience. True healing encompasses the mind, the soul, and the heart. When the heart is burdened with fear, anxiety, anger, or resentment, the body often suffers as well. Conversely, when the heart is at peace, the body can respond more positively to treatment, rest, and care. On my deathbed, I had no choice but to confront my heart honestly. I had to ask myself, what had I neglected? What had I prioritized wrongly? What grudges, regrets, or worries had I carried that weighed me down spiritually? I realized that healing my heart meant releasing what no longer served me. I began to forgive not only others, but also myself. I acknowledged my mistakes and shortcomings and asked Allah for forgiveness, not as a ritual, but as a deep, heartfelt plea. I found that when I sincerely acknowledged my dependence on Allah, my fear of death softened. I realized that the heart, when aligned with trust in the Creator, becomes a source of strength even when the body is frail. I thought about the times in life when I had faced challenges but had remained spiritually detached. I had focused only on the external solution, on medicine, on advice, on plans, while neglecting the internal. I realized that no matter how strong the treatment, no matter how skilled the doctors, if the heart is heavy, anxiety-filled, or distant from Allah, healing cannot be complete. True wellness, I understood, is holistic. It begins with the heart's acceptance of divine will, its openness to mercy, and its readiness to embrace guidance. As I lay there, I felt a growing awareness that healing is not always immediate or dramatic. Sometimes it begins as a subtle shift within, a quiet reassurance, a softening of fear, a moment of clarity. It begins when the heart turns sincerely toward Allah and trusts that whatever happens is by His wisdom. I remembered the stories of the prophets and righteous servants who faced immense trials. They often experienced suffering in the body and the soul, yet their inner peace allowed them to endure and eventually witness miracles. Their healing often began internally, through prayer, reflection, and sincere reliance on Allah, and only then did it manifest externally. I realized that I was experiencing something similar. My fear of death, my regret over past actions, my anxiety about the unknown, these were all barriers that prevented true healing. As I consciously worked to calm my heart, to release tension, and to place my trust fully in Allah, I felt a shift. The heaviness that had occupied me began to lift. I noticed that even small things, like focusing on gratitude for each breath, each heartbeat, each prayer, brought a profound sense of relief. Healing, I realized, is as much about changing perspective as it is about changing circumstances. I began to see my situation differently. What had once seemed purely a test of the body was also a test of the heart and soul. I had been given the opportunity to confront my weaknesses, to align my intentions, and to draw closer to Allah. That realization filled me with hope, even in the midst of pain. I started to understand that when the heart is at peace, it creates conditions for the body to respond. The anxiety, fear, and despair that often accompany illness can exacerbate physical suffering. But when the heart is surrendered, when it is calm and trusting, it can influence the body in ways that are subtle but profound. I began to focus on the mercy of Allah rather than the severity of my condition. I reminded myself that nothing escapes His knowledge, that He alone is capable of restoring, protecting, and strengthening. I made dua not just for physical recovery, but for peace, patience, and clarity of heart. I asked for the ability to accept whatever outcome, knowing that true healing may come through physical recovery, spiritual enlightenment, or peaceful acceptance of divine decree. As I continued this internal work, I noticed the interplay between body and soul. The more I surrendered and trusted, the more my body seemed to respond. Strength returned gradually, energy levels improved, and even my mind felt clearer. I began to see that this was no coincidence. It was the result of aligning my heart with Allah, of opening myself fully to His guidance, mercy, and will. I realized that so many people rush to external solutions while neglecting the internal. We focus on treatments, advice, and strategies while the heart remains heavy and distant from Allah. Yet it is the heart that can initiate true change. the heart that can create readiness for divine intervention, the heart that can prepare the body to receive healing. Reflection and prayer became my anchors. I spent hours quietly turning my heart to Allah, recounting His blessings, seeking forgiveness, and asking for mercy. I felt a warmth, a lightness, and a calm that I had never experienced before. It was a profound reminder that while medicine treats the body and support from others provides comfort, the heart's connection to Allah is the foundation for complete healing. I also noticed that this process changed how I viewed life. I no longer feared the unknown as much. I began to accept that life and death are in Allah's hands, and that surrendering the heart creates resilience, patience, and trust that transcend the immediate situation. I realized that healing is not just about the absence of pain, but about the presence of peace, trust, and alignment with Allah. On that bed, I experienced the truth that while the body may falter, the heart can remain steadfast and even guide the physical body toward recovery. I understood that healing is a holistic process, and that when the heart is aligned with the divine, the soul finds strength, the mind finds clarity, and the body finds the conditions to respond. I reflected on the countless moments in life when I had neglected this internal dimension, when I had focused on external solutions without preparing the heart. And I realized that had I done this earlier, I might have faced challenges with greater ease, patience, and resilience. This awareness strengthened my resolve to live differently, to prioritize the heart's connection with Allah, and to ensure that spiritual wellness is never separated from physical and mental well-being. Even as I lay on that bed, feeling the weakness of my body and the uncertainty of my condition, one thought dominated my mind: hope is never lost when you place your trust in Allah. In those moments when life seems so fragile and death seems so close, I realized that despair only clouds the heart and limits our ability to receive divine mercy. Hope, rooted in faith, is a powerful force. It is what keeps the heart alive when the body falters, what strengthens the soul when fear and doubt creep in, and what allows a person to see light even in the darkest moments. I reflected on how often I had allowed hopelessness to take hold in my life before this point, how quickly I had given up on situations that seemed challenging, how often I had doubted Allah's plan, and how frequently I had neglected to believe in His mercy. On that bed, I had no choice but to cling to hope, for it was the only bridge between despair and divine intervention. I realized that hope is not passive. It is not simply wishing for a better outcome or imagining things could improve. True hope is active. It involves turning to Allah in dua, reflecting on His promises, repenting sincerely, and trusting that He knows what is best. It is the combination of effort and submission, the balance of turning to Him for help while fully accepting that the outcome is in His hands. As I focused on hope, I noticed how it transformed my state. My heart, which had been heavy with fear and anxiety, became lighter. My thoughts, which had been consumed with what-ifs and regrets, became clearer. I felt a renewed energy, not in the body alone, but in the spirit. Hope connected me to Allah in a way that fear could not. I remembered that the Quran repeatedly reminds us not to despair of Allah's mercy. The words echoed in my mind with new meaning: do not despair of the mercy of Allah. Indeed, Allah forgives all sins. Indeed, it is He who is the forgiving, the merciful. I understood that these verses were not merely comforting statements, but a call to actively maintain hope no matter the circumstances. I began to reflect on the stories of those who were saved in the face of seemingly impossible odds. Prophets, companions, and righteous servants faced trials that tested every aspect of their being, yet they never gave up hope in Allah. Their faith, coupled with unwavering hope, allowed miracles to unfold. I realized that I was standing on the threshold of my own test, and that hope was my companion. guiding me through uncertainty and fear. I also noticed that hope creates resilience. When the heart is anchored in hope, it can endure hardships with patience and strength. It does not allow fear or despair to dominate. Even as I felt my body weaken, hope encouraged me to continue, to make dua, to reflect, and to trust in Allah's wisdom. It reminded me that surrendering to Allah does not mean abandoning effort. It means continuing with faith and trust, even when the situation appears impossible. I spent hours quietly in prayer, pouring my heart out, and yet maintaining hope in Allah's mercy. I asked for healing, for strength, for forgiveness, and for guidance. Each supplication reinforced my connection with Him and reminded me that I was never truly alone. I realized that hope is intimately connected with gratitude. Even while struggling, I found reasons to thank Allah for life, for breath, for the people around me, for the moments I had experienced, and for the chance to turn back to Him. Gratitude nurtures hope because it reminds us of past mercies and encourages us to trust in future ones. As I reflected further, I noticed that hope also transforms perspective. It allows a person to see possibilities where others see dead ends. It encourages patience, fosters resilience, and inspires continuous reliance on Allah. I understood that the difference between despair and hope is often a matter of perspective. When the heart trusts in Allah's plan, it sees opportunities for mercy even in situations that appear hopeless. My condition began to improve gradually, and I recognized that these changes were not merely medical. They were the result of a heart aligned with faith and sustained by hope. The fear that had once dominated me began to ebb, replaced by trust. My body, though still weak, responded better to care, treatment, and rest because my mind and heart were no longer weighed down by panic and despair. I also realized that hope strengthens the ability to accept whatever outcome Allah decides. Even as I prayed for healing, I understood that ultimate submission to Allah's will is the highest form of hope. It is hope that trusts not only in relief, but also in the wisdom and mercy behind every decree. This understanding brought a peace I had never experienced before. I began to see that hope is contagious. When I held on to hope, the people around me, the family, the friends, the caretakers, also felt a sense of reassurance and calm. They prayed, comforted, and supported me, and their efforts were amplified because my heart was open and receptive. In that environment, divine mercy could flow more freely. I reflected on how often people give up too early, lose hope in moments of difficulty, or allow fear to dominate. I realized that hope is a shield against despair, a light in darkness, and a catalyst for miracles. Maintaining hope does not mean ignoring reality or denying hardship. It means acknowledging the difficulty while firmly trusting that Allah is capable of change, healing, and mercy. I understood that hope transforms the way we experience suffering. It does not necessarily remove the pain immediately, but it changes our relationship to it. It allows us to endure, to reflect, to grow spiritually, and to remain open to Allah's guidance. On that bed, I experienced firsthand that hope can inspire resilience, strengthen faith, and even influence physical recovery. I realized that without hope, fear dominates, faith weakens, and the heart closes itself off from mercy. With hope, however, the heart opens, trust deepens, and healing, whether physical, emotional, or spiritual, becomes possible. I spent my days focusing on hope, sustaining it through prayer, reflection, and gratitude, and observing how it affected not only my heart, but also my body and mind. I noticed that even small improvements felt magnified because they were accompanied by trust and expectation rooted in Allah's mercy. Each moment reinforced the understanding that hope, combined with sincere surrender and dua, is a powerful force that can transform a person's experience, even the brink of death. I reflected on the importance of hope as an ongoing practice, not a one-time feeling. Life is filled with tests, hardships, and uncertainties. But by nurturing hope in Allah's mercy, a person maintains resilience, patience, and spiritual strength through every trial. I recognize that hope is deeply tied to faith, trust, and the heart's alignment with divine will. On that deathbed, I realized that even when circumstances seem dire, hope opens the door for healing, for mercy, and for a renewed connection with Allah, and that it is never too late to embrace hope fully.